Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm gonna start by presenting myself. So my name is Daniela Martin, but you can call me Danny if you want. And I'm the Director of Communications at the Institute for Medicine Innovation. And we're a nonprofit research organization that is working in social research. Impact evaluation is like our core expertise. And we also provide online training and we also take care of public engagement tasks in projects that we are involved in. And you will see a few examples of those during today's presentation. So thank you very much for joining us today. While people are still arriving, because I see that we're still getting a lot of people, I'm still seeing a lot of people coming in. Please feel free to say hello in the chat and let us know where you're joining from, and if you want your reason for joining today's webinar. I would really be interested in getting to know you a little bit better if you want. Of course, it's not mandatory. And while we wait for more people to join, let me just get this done. The usual thing when you introduce yourself. So as I was already saying, I'm the Director of Communications at IMI, but I have also been involved in academia. So I have been a professor in Mexico. I have been not a professor because in Europe the titles work a little bit different, but I was teaching undergrads in Germany in the Science Communication Bachelor's program in a university in Germany. And I do have a master's degree in science communication, and that has been my core area of expertise basically since, I don't know, more than 15 years. So I have worked a lot with producing media content, videos, infographics, you name it, but also working with stakeholders, engaging with people in very different contexts, very different projects with very different purposes. But yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. What I wanted to now talk about is how well, here's the shape of the next minutes that we're going to be spending together. So what I'm going to do is that I will be presenting for about 40 minutes, hopefully not that long. Then we'll keep the rest for your questions, because I think that that's the most important section of today's session. And everything that we're going to be talking about today rests on one single idea, and that is that collaborative sessions should be designed backwards from the thing that you needed to produce. So I'll take you through 4 design principles that we follow in the work that we do at IMI. And then what I will do is that I'll ground them in 3 worked examples. So one is the ATLIC white paper, the Elevate CoLab co-creation guidelines, and then the REMHub co-creation program. These projects have been, well, for example, ATLIC is an Erasmus Plus project. Elevate CoLab was a project that was funded by the Dana Foundation in the US, and REMHub is a EU-funded project. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about each of them in just a few minutes. And so just so you know, you will receive the slides, and of course, you will receive all the relevant documents that I mentioned afterwards. So you don't need to write anything or everything down, you know? And of course, to make this practical, I want you to think, now that you have been introducing yourselves, I want you to think, and if you want, tell us in the chat as well about, I don't know, what session are you planning? Maybe a workshop, co-creation session, or you have like a participatory meeting that you're planning. And what do you think it needs to produce? Like what it needs to produce. And I want you to keep that session in mind for the whole hour, because every principle that we're going to be talking about is meant to be applied to it. Okay? So just think about what's next. What do you need to plan? Okay, so here are the main 6 ways that I have identified. I'm sure that there are more. There are 6. These are 6 ways that collaborative sessions usually fall short. And I'm sure that most of us have sat through a session like that. That, I don't know, you join a meeting and there are 2 hours of discussion, a lot of goodwill, of course, and afterwards nothing happens, right? Maybe a picture of flip charts and nobody sees that picture again, and no one knows what happened after the workshop, right? So when workshops fail, I have noticed that they usually fail in very predictable ways. And at least these six cover most of the cases. Um, the useful observation here is that number 3 and 4 are the ones that happen during the session itself. So it's like unmanaged hierarchy. So some problems with power dynamics and not being able to handle those, and of course having an unstructured discussion and drift, so not having a very solid agenda. But the other ones are basically settled before anyone enters the room, so that is or when the session is being designed or after everyone leaves, so that's when the follow-up happens or doesn't happen. So today is mostly about design decisions, and we will finish with number 6, which is the follow-through. So the 4 principles that we'll be discussing today will map directly onto these failures. So you know what's coming our way. Okay, so let's talk about principle 1, which is start from the output. So the first principle is all about designing backwards. So this means that you need to start with a specific thing, a concrete thing, I like to call it, that has to exist after the session. So in this sense, and I'm sure it has happened to you as well, we often feel like a workshop was valuable when we need to, I don't know, to do collective work, to think, to prioritize, to decide together. So if the purpose that you've written down is just to get feedback or to discuss the project, well, I have bad news, because that is describing an activity and it tells you nothing about what the session must create. So the quickest test that I know is to put a weak purpose and a stronger purpose and a stronger purpose side by side. So let me show you exactly that so you can see the difference. So let's say that you have this purpose, which is a weak one. It's fine. I have started with this type of idea, so it's not bad at all, but it's weak. It's vague and it's abstract. Let's say that you say, oh, well, we want to get stakeholders' views on our intervention. So nobody could say that that's not a good purpose, But also, I don't think that nobody could easily design a session from that idea either. So because it's too vague and it's too abstract, as I was already saying. Now, if we take a look at a stronger example, let's say that you go even further and you get more specific. Let's say, well, this workshop will help community health practitioners to identify the 3 implementation barriers most likely to affect the uptake of the intervention. Whatever that intervention is just for the sake of the example here, and agree what evidence or support would be needed to address them. So if you read it again, you will notice that it answers 3 design questions. One, who needs to be in the room? So that's the community health practitioners. Then what they will need to produce. So that is the 3 prioritized barriers, and then a list of evidence needs. And then finally, how you will know that the session succeeded, because those things either exist at the end or they don't. And that's the standard to hold your own purpose. And I'm kind of blocking this, your own purpose statement. And it's harder than it looks, which is why we'll build it up step by step over the next few slides. So I'm kind of seeing that we have a little bit of spam in the chat. So Stephen, if you could please block this person or remove them from the session, that would be great. Thanks. Anyway, okay, so an output. Let's talk about outputs and outcomes. So an output is a tangible thing. It needs to be specific enough that someone could look after the session and then say, oh, well, yes, it exists, or no, it doesn't exist, right? So it could be a decision with its rationale behind it. It could be a stakeholder map, a draft theory of change, a ranked short list, an action plan with specific owners. Then you can apply a quick test, right? Is the output more specific than just discussion or feedback? Can it be used by someone afterwards? Can it be by a named person or a team? And is the intended outcome more than just the fact that the workshop happened, right? And then one other thing that I really like you to think about, and that's something that has helped me a lot because things happen, is that decide in advance or think in advance what would be your minimum viable output. So that's the one thing that it needs to exist, even if the agenda slips, even if a key person cancels and doesn't join or doesn't attend the meeting, or even if you're having an online session, even if you, I don't know, your camera doesn't work or your microphone is acting weird. So what is the minimum viable output? So if you know that, it will let you cut and simplify what you will need to do in a calm way instead of panicking and improvising under pressure. So always think about the minimum viable output, okay? Okay, so everything from the last few slides, I think that it compresses into just one sentence, and it's the one that we have right here. And that this is the one that I suggest you writing before you write any agenda whatsoever. And that is, this is a certain type of session. So type, we mean consultation, co-design session, maybe a decision meeting, I don't know, designed to help someone, a particular participant, particular stakeholder, to produce something, which is the output, so that an action, whatever that is, a decision, maybe an activity, something can happen. So each element does its own work, right? The type will set the expectation of who holds the decision authority. Then the participants will force you to think about who must be present in the room, because the recruitment also needs to be very, very strategic in that sense. The output is the tangible product that we have been talking about. And then the final clause, the one that says an action, it's what connects the session to something beyond itself. So what I will always say, and I will say to you, and if there is something that I need you to remember from today's webinar, is that if you can't complete this sentence, then I would say that the workshop isn't designed yet. And the honest move is to basically postpone the invitations until you can, of course. I know that there are some sessions that need to happen like really quick, and we don't have enough time to plan ahead, right? Okay, so let's try to ground this in a worked example. And the first one is the ATLIC project. This one, I will show you how this first principle is operating at a program scale. So it's not just at a session scale, like just one session, but actually program scale. So I will give you a little bit more context. The ATLIC project, what it's doing is that it's what it's calling the connecting young people with the blue economy. And the blue economy basically is all the economic activities linked to the seas, to the oceans. And there are 4 countries or 4 partners from 4 countries working in this project. And the main objective that we have is that we want to create what we call a youth entrepreneurship community. So that is through ideation and creation of projects, their own projects that will hopefully help advance Atlantic Europe in the blue economy. So, and we're one of the 10 partners. So what I want to show you here is the order of the operations that we followed, okay? The project didn't begin by scheduling co-creation workshops from the outset and then looking for content to fill them. What we did is that we started with the problem, right? In this case, for example, we ran online surveys across the 4 countries. And then what we did is that we validated the results in roundtables with young people, businesses, institutions, researchers. So we managed to do this across 3 editions, what we call 3 editions. So it was a yearly survey, an annual survey. And in the end, we ended up with more than 800 participants that contributed to that identification of needs. Of course, not everyone will have the time to do this before actually going into a co-creation session. So don't worry, we'll be talking about more examples in just a few minutes. So once we had the needs or the challenges identified, well, that list it wasn't just like, oh, let's identify them just for the sake of identify them. For us, it was an output with a named user because it became the input for the co-creation sessions then. And so the ideas from those fed what we call the In a Blue Labs. So In a Blue Labs was a program where young people basically developed potential solutions to the challenges identified via the surveys, and they developed them, and then they tested them in real world scenarios. So the pattern here is that every stage in that chain could complete our own design statement. So the lesson is not that you need a survey of 800 people to do something, right? It's that the ATLIC project in this case never designed a session without knowing the problem it served and who would use what it was supposed to produce. So at your scale, that might be 5 conversations, right? Having 5 conversations with people, or maybe having a short scoping exercise with your key stakeholders or even your internal team, right? But the order is the same. Try to start with the problem first, then define the output, and then design the workshop. So this brings me to the first application point, which is before you draft an agenda, write the design statement. So that's the sentence that we just talked about in the last few slides. Okay. So that takes me to principle 2, sequence the work. This is the one that I like the most because it's very practical and very clear. So once you know the output, what you need the workshop to end up with, the session becomes a working sequence with 3 main jobs, right? Opening up, this is where the group generates ideas, evidence, options. They open up and talk about their concerns. Then analyzing, this is where it makes sense of what was generated. You can cluster, you can compare, you can prioritize in the session. And then closing down, which is when we decide, we assign, we commit to something. So I would say that most disappointing workshops for me do only the first job, which is opening up. You know, ideas get generated, the energy is high, and then time runs out and nothing has been analyzed, nothing can be decided. I'm sure you have experienced the wall of sticky notes, like that's a nightmare that has no conclusion. At least one time in your life you have experienced that. So make sure what I'm trying to say here is that when you start designing your workshop or your session and you start drafting your agenda, make sure that you label every block of your draft agenda with one of these 3 jobs. I don't know, is this opening up? Is this analyzing? Is this closing down? And if you notice that one of the blocks in your agenda, well, aside from introduction and presentations, of course, if a block doesn't do any of them, then it's probably, I would say, just decoration. So that would allow you to kind of identify what it's just like fluff and remove that and make a more efficient use of your time. Okay. So let me make that concrete with an example from our workshop materials. So you will see the same, it has the same purpose in both cases, right? To identify implementation barriers and then agree next evidence needs. The week sequence is the default in most sessions, right? So we have a presentation, we have a discussion, and then we have a closing round of final thoughts, which is fine for a format like this, like a webinar, right? Because the format is a webinar, but it's not a co-creation. I'm not trying to co-create anything with you right now. So it feels like a meeting in the end, and it produces nothing but just a bunch of transcriptions of meeting notes with just like opinions from everyone. Now, if you take a look at the stronger sequence on your right, you will see that in this case, we can decide to start with something that we call silent listing. So in this case, every barrier will get recorded before, as you know, the loudest voice will potentially frame the room. So this gives the opportunity to people that are more shy or that do not feel safe enough or to basically voice their opinions. So silent listing would actually give them the opportunity to say what they think without exposing themselves to the group, if that's the case. Then we have a small group clustering. This is, let's say, breakout groups, and we ask them to cluster the barriers, and then we ask them to prioritize them by impact, by feasibility, of course, explaining to them what impact and feasibility is. And what we have done in the past is that we have also prepared worksheets or tools that they can use to actually do that. So it's not about just asking them to go into breakout groups and say, oh, prioritize by impact and feasibility. We always take the time to explain, and we call this facilitation technique. Yeah, 1, 2, 4, exactly. So you need to explain very well, of course, that's a facilitation technique. And we end up with an evidence needs table, right? So you can see that it's the same people, it's the same hour, but the second version, what it will do is that it will hands a project team or whoever can use this something tangible that they can act on the next morning, the next week, the next month. Okay? So you can see this backbone in 2 different scales in these 2 projects. So I have already been talking about ATLIC. So the core framework is what I was already mentioning, what we call the In a Blue Lab cycle. So that's the program that we had with young people. And then we use really cool names like the 3 phases, right? Ideation, maker, and scale. So ideation here is the opening up, basically. So these were co-creation sessions with young people, with stakeholders to define concepts around the blue economy. Then the maker phase was the analyzing phase. This is where we tested. We had months of prototyping with continuous mentoring, etc. And then scale, it's what we did to close down. And this was towards, of course, market readiness and pitching. So that's the backbone stretched over a program. And then our second example, this one is the Elevate Collab project. And this project in particular was focused on neurodiversity in the workplace. So it was all about talking about the challenges that neurodiverse people face in the workplace, and then coming up with strategies that we could pilot in some working environments. So anyway, so it runs the same logic, but we did this inside a single session, the opening up, analyzing, and closing down. So we had small groups explore challenge questions. And of course, we had, in this case, previous interviews. Like, I think we conducted like 6 what we call empathy interviews. And you will find all this information in the guidelines that I will be sharing with you to kind of get a sense of the main challenges, to not go completely blank to the co-creation session. So we did this. Then we asked them to prioritize the challenges. We asked them to build pilot proposals with objectives, resources, timelines, and of course, how we would know if the pilot was a success. And we had worksheets, we had whiteboards, we had everything. So you can see here that we had opening up, analyzing, and closing down in just one afternoon. So the application here that I want you to take is sketch your agenda in those 3 columns: opening up, analyzing, and closing down. Okay, and check that every block does at least one of those jobs. Okay, so here's a third example, just to give you a little bit more context. So REMHub, that's the third project that we're going to be talking about today. REMHub is kind of a very technical project. I would say it's an EU-funded project. What it's doing is that it's building European capacity to recycle what something that it's called rare earth magnets or permanent magnets. So these magnets are something that we have in our phones, in our TVs, in our electric vehicles. And what the problem that we have right now in Europe is that we rely on Chinese supply for these magnets in particular. So this project, what it's doing is that it's saying, well, we have a lot of things that already contain magnets in Europe. Why don't we find a way to recycle them and to reuse them? So that's the whole point in very, very simple terms. So one of the tasks that we're currently leading is the stakeholder engagement activities. And we are responsible of delivering 12 co-creation workshops with stakeholders from the whole value chain. So that's recyclers, magnet producers, things like that. And these sessions, we're planning them right now. So this is like a work in progress. And I want to explain how we are doing this following the principles that I'm presenting you today. So what we did is that the first question that we asked ourselves is that what is actually standing in the way, right? So let's say that we figure out the way to recycle of all of these things, but what would happen or what would need to happen to make stakeholders really adopt the technologies and the results? And turns out that the answer is not technical at all. So we're talking about the cost. Maybe it will be a lot cheaper to get those magnets from China instead of the recycled ones. We also have a broken supply chain. We have a lot of permits to talk about, and of course, the public acceptance of this. So we figure that, of course, a presentation cannot solve those problems, but maybe a room containing the right industry, policy, and finance actors working on the problem together maybe can solve the problem potentially. So that's why each workshop is going to be built around a problem rather than just a set of findings to present, okay? And each one, as I was already mentioning to you, each one has to end with something that was not there at the start. So it could be a specification, a map of barriers, something. And this is the test that I have been sharing with technical partners, because I have been asking technical partners to kind of propose topics that we could talk about, because I have zero technical expertise in this area, of course. So I'm relying on them to actually propose topics for the workshops. And what I have been saying to them is, okay, think of it like this. If the session would still make sense with participants only listening to you, then that's dissemination, and that's not what we want. But if it falls apart without their contribution, then that's when we will know that it's actually co-creation. And that's been really helpful, because of course, technical partners will know nothing about designing co-creation sessions, right? So that choice also is about choosing the topic, but it's also choosing who needs to be in the room before anything else, right? So before starting to plan the workshops, what we have done is we conducted a stakeholder analysis using what we call the 3I framework, which I'm going to be sharing with you as well today, both an article and a template that you can use. And we identified 17 stakeholder categories. And what we did is that we scored them for interest, for influence, for impact. And these results are currently telling us who do we need to involve in these sessions, who do we need to handle with care, of course, as well, and who do we need to keep just informed. And what we will do is that each workshop will recruit against those stakeholder categories. And the priority here is deliberate, of course, because we will make sure that all the external actors, whether that's industry, policy, finance, those that will decide whether any of what we are doing in the REMHub project gets adopted, that's the people that we need to bring to the room. So that needs to come before anything else. And then there is the gate. So we have told partners that no workshop will run until we have a participant list that has been checked against the categories, that we confirm that they are well matched, and that we don't have any gaps in representation. And so, yeah, that needs to be closed before any invitations go out, okay? So, of course, this is not glamorous project management, and it is the difference between a room that can act and a room that can only comment, right? So, and that responds, of course, to the objectives that we have set for these sessions in particular. And this will respond to the objectives that you will set for your session as well. So this is just an example. It's not that you need to do this every time. So the application point is list the people who will enable your results, your intervention, what you're doing to get used, to get implemented, to get adopted, and then check that they're actually in your invitation list. Otherwise, probably you will end up wasting a little bit of time if you're going for a co-creation workshop. Okay, third principle. By the way, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat or save them for yourself, and then we can talk about it in just a few minutes when we start with the Q&A. Okay, third principle. And before we get into the third principle, because I've been talking for a while now, I want to ask you something to bring us back together. So I want to ask you, which of these most often derails the sessions that you have attended? Is it a dominant voice, option A, a vague purpose, B, a discussion drift, C, or D, no follow-up afterwards? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of, oh, very varied perfect, okay, got it. All A, D, C, all of the above, vague. Perfect. Okay, so I have news for you. So whatever your answer is, there's a common root, which is that open, unstructured discussion underperforms in very predictable ways. Okay, and there is a research that that identified three what they call losses decades ago. You can see actually it's 1991 here. Oh, my video is mirrored, but this research is from decades ago, and we have three main points here. So production blocking, that's where people forget or abandon ideas while waiting for the turn to speak. And I'm sure it has happened to me. It's like, oh, well, someone kind of asked what I wanted to ask, so I might as well not just say anything at all in the end. Then we have evaluation apprehension. And this is where, let's say that you bring together people in the room that are junior, senior, like people in very different places in their life. And of course, being junior, you will hold back from saying anything because you would have the fear that you will get criticized by senior people, or you will end up like looking, I don't know, sounding stupid or something. So sometimes that's just in our head because there are no stupid comments, I would say, or not no stupid questions, but that happens. And you need to give them the space to actually voice their opinions, comments, questions. And of course, social loafing, which is where the effort concentrates on the willing few while others just listen passively, right? And yeah, Martin is saying this is usually because of poor planning and facilitation rather than due to people in the room. Exactly that. So what I see, what I'm going to say is that none of this means that participants are unwilling. They are willing. They are there. They're attending the session. It means that open discussion, it's a very weak method, okay? And the good news is that the fix is quite structural. So these are some of the methods that we have implemented in some of our sessions. It depends on, of course, the power dynamics, who is going to be in the room. Of course, I would urge you to have a skilled facilitator. So it's not like putting someone who hasn't facilitated a workshop or a meeting before in front of people for a co-creation workshop. Make sure that you have someone who is actually knowing what they're doing. Okay, so let's go one by one. What they're going to do is that each one of these will absorb a specific pressure that would otherwise, I would say, shape the room. So let's start with the first one. Silent writing first. So this is before any discussion. This means that every idea will get captured before the first voice or the most dominant voice frames the conversation. Okay, so you can ask people to maybe put something in the chat or I don't know, share a worksheet, and then they will share the worksheet back to you, and you will have their opinions there. You can think of many different ways to do this. Then we have round robin sharing. This basically what it does is that it gives the quieter people a guaranteed slot to talk. Instead of asking them to interrupt, because some people will just not do that, and it's fine. I always say during my sessions that anyone can interrupt me, but if I was on the other side, I was like, no, I don't want to interrupt, so I do get this. Then we have the anonymous voting. This, what it does is that it removes the social cost of maybe disagreeing with someone senior and you not knowing that, not wanting to do that. So yeah, it reduced the conformity pressure and the status deference. Then we have the having or asking the seniors to speak last, right? Seniors, or it could be a very influential stakeholder that you have identified. So if you ask senior people to speak last in early rounds of discussion, it will stop the status or the power to dominate or to set the frame of the discussion. And finally, the pre-work moves information sharing out of the live session. So this will allow you to concentrate or to focus on the fact that the time together is spent on actual things that are useful, on trade-offs and decisions rather than just briefings, right? Laura, what is round robin sharing? So this is where you say that you will give people an opportunity to talk if they want. Of course, it's like I don't know. Let me put this. I'm sure that you have done this or you have experienced this. When you want to schedule a meeting with someone, let's say that a sales call or something, there is something that it's called round robin. So it's like talk to our sales team. So what it will do is that in the back end in the system, let's say of Apple store, you will select a time, a date, and then in the back end of the system, it will say, oh, round robin. So it's basically who is available to talk or to talk to these people. That person will meet with them. It's the same in live sessions. So it's like randomizing the discussion and saying, well, now Julianne will be talking. Okay, Charles, do you have something to say? Like giving them the option or the opportunity to talk. And how can you manage timing with round robin sharing? That's very, very important. You really need to take to be on top of time. So let's say that you have 20 minutes for round robin sharing and you have 10 people in the room. So you would say, okay, everyone will have the opportunity to talk, but we're going to be limiting that to 2 minutes. And you in Zoom, for example, it's really easy to put the timer and then you will hear like a cheesy sound like dee, 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 when they have 10 seconds. So it's like, just make sure that you use your time wisely because you will get interrupted. And sorry, because everyone will have the time to talk. Something like that. You have to be really firm with how you handle time because it can be consuming. It can consume basically everything if you're not on top of it. Okay, so the point that I'd like to underline here is that structure does the work that personal authority cannot or that a facilitator cannot. So it has happened to me. Even if you're a skilled facilitator, all the time a room will tend to drift towards existing power. So just make sure that you're choosing methods that will manage that by design. So you will no longer need to rely on your charisma or on confrontation. That, of course, would be the least desirable technique to confront someone during a live session. Okay, so now let's talk about two examples I've been mentioning and see how they apply these principles. For example, in the Elevate Collab workshops, what we did is that we asked participants to respond in writing before speaking. And there was more than one route to contribute. So people could work on the shared whiteboard, type in the chat, or speak. And what we did as facilitators is that we were capturing all the input live in like we were sharing our screen and then gathering all the input. And this really mattered because it was a project centered on neurodiversity. So we had a lot of people with different profiles in the room. So a single channel would have excluded people, right? Then, for example, in ATLIC, the same thinking, but showing in the mentor role. This is how we managed power dynamics. So the white paper, which is a document that we're going to be sharing with you, was very explicit that mentors did not impose solutions in this case. So they validate ideas, they challenge the assumptions of the young participants. They provided what it was called a reality check. So it was guiding without taking over. And you can hear what that felt like from a participant in this case, Eduarda Gonçalves. So she said basically that reaching consensus across different perspectives is really hard, and that having a structured guidance and tools was what made it comfortable, right? So the application call, I was just reading Louise' comment here. Yeah, I kind of mixed those things, but that the calling is great. If you don't have people that are really sensitive to that, of course, you have to be really respectful of, if someone doesn't want to talk, then it's fine. And you have to say that upfront. Okay, so I'm kind of blocking here, but I'm saying that for each block of your agenda, try to identify the likeliest power risk and then pick one method of the ones we just discussed that could reduce it. Okay? And finally, principle 4, close down and follow through. This is really straightforward. I think that the last part of any session, it's supposed to convert the outputs into commitments. And this needs to happen while people who made them are still in the room. Because if you wait and say, oh, we'll follow up with you and see who will do this and who will do that, it will not happen, or it will be very, very difficult. And you can achieve this in 3 moves, I would say. So one is decide. By applying whatever decision rule was agreed at the start, and then name out loud both what was chosen and what was deferred as well, because that's important. Then make sure to record it live. I'm not talking about recording the session, but actually like gathering the input live and letting people see it. So you can project maybe a Word document or a whiteboard, and then start writing things down, because this will prevent that nightmare of email going back and forth, and that follows if you send like very vague minutes or meeting notes, etc. And then of course capture the minimum fields for every action, so that it's the decision, the owner, what would be the first step, a deadline, any dependency. Of course, it will depend on the type of co-creation workshop. Not everyone will end up with a decision, but an output, And because writing this from memory after the session I would say, is where most workshop value quietly disappears. So writing it during the session takes 5 minutes and makes the record everyone's record. So Anissa is asking, well, doesn't this risk rushing to decisions without time to process? Yes, of course. Of course, these are just principles that I'm giving to you, but it has happened to us that if you need to reach a decision, remember that we were talking about the opening up, analyzing, and closing down. Sometimes you cannot do that in one session. Sometimes you have to design the co-creation process in several sessions, or you need to do some pre-work, like having interviews or a survey or an informal conversation with people. But it will depend on your design. I wouldn't expect you to, in just under an hour, to come up with a decision and an owner and first step. I would say that that's a process that could extend several sessions, or maybe just 2, depending. That's why it's very important to start from the problem, define the output, and also identify the stakeholders really, really well, because that will allow you to be more efficient with your time. Yeah, exactly. Martin, it's not necessarily reaching a decision, but recording the process and eventually how you reached a decision. Exactly. So maybe the output is not a decision. Maybe the output is just a list of barriers or a list of needs. And then you're going to start the next co-creation session without output and then create a new one, right? Like a staged process in this case. So then make sure that you close the loop quickly, because our guidance is 2 working days, because after, at least from our experience, both the recall, the motivation drop quite dramatically. So the summary I would say that you send to participants has to have 3 main parts. So one is the decisions or the outputs, like what was done during the co-creation session, what was done, what wasn't done, and what were the reasons for each of them. Then the second thing is influence. So meaning what changed because of what participants contributed. And just as important, what didn't change and why not. And then finally, the next steps, right? So with owners and the date you report back, maybe It's you saying we will have a second session where we will be talking about the output that we produced during this first session, and then we're gonna do this and this and this. So that's enough. So it's not, you don't need to end with a decision or a super defined plan of what needs to happen for the next 10 years, you know? So that middle element, the number 2, the influence paragraph, I would say is the one, it's the most important one, and it's the one that we often skip when we send the follow-up email. Because this is the one that will do most for you in terms of trust. People, you have to think that people gave you their time, they gave you their thinking. So showing them what it changed is how you earn their attendance next time. So that's the difference between consultation and the appearance of consultation. Okay. So I want to end this session with this section, the fourth principle, with the parts of the case studies that didn't go smoothly, of course, because the documents that I'm gonna be sharing with you are really candid about this. For example, ATLIC, we built an online e-network. So it was a virtual community that wanted to keep its community connected between the different events and the processes in the project. So the white paper that you're going to be receiving reports plainly that it struggled to sustain engagement. And of course, we had to reevaluate it and kind of change the format. So the lesson that we draw here is on the slide, and that is that technology alone is not sufficient to create a community. In this case, of course, one of the purpose of the co-creation sessions, of course, it was to create a community. That's why it's important here. So it needs a clear purpose, relevant content, active facilitation, which is true of workshop follow-ups generally. Then we have the Elevate Collab guidelines. So that these guidelines make the same point, but from other directions. So share outcomes back and involve participants in what happens next. That's really important. Or in the guide's own words, co-creation risks becoming performative rather than transformative. It's kind of a cheesy line, but I like it. You have to make sure that it's not just saying, or it's just an exercise of ticking a box and saying, yeah, we had a co-creation exercise. No, you actually need to follow through and follow up with people. So the application here is unglamorous, the application point, but it's very effective. And it's that before your session happens, put time in your calendar for the follow-up summary. Because usually follow-up or follow-through fails by neglect and not by intention. Sometimes we just forget about it, you know? It's like, well, the session has taken place. I have everything that I need. Yeah, I will write to the stakeholders and participants later. And then a week goes by and it's like, I didn't send that email, and people will actually be wondering what happened, right? So key takeaways, here's the whole hour in just one slide. If you named a session in the chat at the start, run it against this list now. So first, can you complete the design statement that we just talked about? 2, do you know the output and the minimum that you'd settle for? 3, does the agenda open up, analyze, and close down? Or the process itself, not just one agenda, but maybe the process of the whole co-creation activities, the co-creation activities that you're going to be having? Then 4, have you chosen methods for the power risks that you can predict? Because sometimes you cannot predict them and you have to kind of figure them out in the moment. 5, do you know who is capturing the decisions and actions live? I always say that it's very good practice to have the lead facilitator, but also someone else from your team capturing everything, right? Taking notes, etc. Because one person cannot do everything at the same time. And then finally, the last line is the follow-up summary already in your calendar. So if you can answer those 6, then I would say that your session is designed in the meaningful sense of the word, of course. The 2 documents that you will receive after the session will carry the detail behind all of this. So these are the resources that you will receive, of course, the slides, the ATLIC white paper. So that is the full account of the methodology that we talked about today, the surveys, the roundtables, the co-creation sessions with the young participant, etc. And that the Elevate Collab Guide is a short practical booklet that we developed based on our experience. And it talks about empathy interviews, not only co-creation workshops, but also empathy interviews, if that's of interest. And it has planning tables. It has templates in there for you to use, and that you can adapt directly. So between the two of them, they cover the two ends of the spectrum, so that it's like a transnational multi-year program, and then a single well-designed session. The REMHub materials, of course, are internal planning documents, but I expect them to be published in 2027. So make sure to follow us on social media, because we will be sharing them there. And of course, the slides. Okay, so FYI, we do have a few minutes for questions, but if today has been useful and if you'd like to go deeper, just so you know, we do run a full practical workshop called Facilitating Collaborative Workshops and Meetings, which works through design, facilitation methods, managing power, difficult moments, etc. And details are in the Fast Track Impact website here. And there's no obligation, of course, attached to attending today's session. Yeah, thank you everyone for your time this hour. And now it's time for your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if someone has a question. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the kind words. I'm sure that if there was a question that you put in the chat and then it kind of was missed in all of these messages, just tell me about it. You can just unmute yourself and ask your questions. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. And please.
Hi, Daniela. Thanks so much. Yeah, my question is, so sometimes I've been hired as a facilitator, and I feel like I've done a lot of what you were saying, but then the group that hired me, like they hired me for that particular facilitation, and then it's kind of out of my hands, and I've been frustrated that they haven't done the follow-up. So what would you recommend to not get myself into that position again? Because it's like uncomfortable, because then people will come up to me and say, hey, whatever happened after that workshop?
Yeah, I would say what we have done is that whenever we have done that, one thing that has worked for us, although not all the time, is that we prepare the follow-up draft message. And then as soon as the session is over, maybe 1 or 2 hours later, you would send it or you would share it with the people who hired you, like, hey, John, please send this follow-up message to the participants. And you can ask directly, like, if you would like me to do that, I can do that. Just tell me, or please do it yourself. And can you please let me know if there are any follow-up questions? That will make them feel a little bit more pressure to actually do it. It doesn't work all the time, but at least you are telling the people who hired you, and they hired you for a reason, right? It's like you are the expert in this kind of things. You're telling them that that's an essential part of the session. And you can also be very explicit about that if you want, when they hire you, for sure. Sometimes the planned follow-up takes time. So if you have fixed time in the calendar and you're unable to meet the deadline, does it mean you need to keep going back to the group? I would say that, yeah, just for courtesy, if you have nothing yet ready to share, you could just send a follow-up message saying, hey, thank you for participating in this session. Just to let you know, we're still analyzing and we're processing all the things that we gathered during the session, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. If you do that, I'm sure that people will say, thank you, my time was valued. So you can do that. Any tips on audio recording, transcribing live during the workshop to ensure accuracy? Yes, of course. If it's online, it's quite easy because you can just turn on the recording tool in whatever platform you're using, Zoom, Google Meets, Teams. But if you're doing it live, like in person, I would definitely urge you, but this would depend on the budget, of course. But what we have done in the past is that we usually have co-creation sessions and people divide themselves in like round tables. So we have either not purchased, I think that we have rented microphones, like this omnidirectional microphones, and we have put one of them in each of the tables. So that's something that we have done, but of course it's not optimal if you don't have the budget or the equipment. But that would be the only tip that I have for you, because it comes down to the equipment that you have, not really if you're willing to record something. But right now, with all the social content, social media creators, there are a bunch of very affordable microphones that I would recommend you using for sure. And when it comes to the questions and sharing the I don't know, the results, make sure that you kind of pass around the microphone and that you're recording that as well. If you apply this methodology, are the results publishable in highly ranked journals? Lucrina, if you could tell me more about this question, it would be great, because I think I don't understand it quite really well. And
Yes.
then...
So, hi, Daniela. So,
Hi, Lucrina.
I'm asking you this because we organized a workshop, a co-creation workshop in November last year, and we wanted to publish a paper. But our methodology was not that, structured. And we had some co-creation exercises and so on, but we have had problems in publishing the results of that workshop. So that was the question, if we can think about the workshop before, as in a publishable result, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, I would say that I don't know if you can do that in highly ranked journals, because every journal has their own guidelines and requirements. What we have done in the past is that you can resort to open source or open journals. So we have done this before, and we have published in Open Research Europe. That's a really good one. But of course, it's not like, oh, highly ranked journals. You're not publishing in Nature or something like that. I would say that those journals do appreciate more focusing on the methodology itself. But of course, it would need to be a very robust methodology. So it would depend on the kind of content and the journal. But if you really want to publish them, I would say that an open journal or an open platform would be good enough. At least that has been in our case. And for example, the 3i framework, we published it in an open access journal, and it has taken off, and it has allowed us now to publish in more highly ranked journals, as you would call them.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. Julia, I have a question. Gathering the right participants, any tips and tricks on attracting the right stakeholders to attend? Yeah, if any of you actually know how to do that, that would be great. Recruitment, I think it's the most underestimated step in the co-creation process. Every time. We always assume that people will be interested and willing and will have the time, and that's not the case. So one, it would be, if you really choose very well your stakeholders, they will be interested and they will likely join the meeting. So you need to make really clear to them what they can expect from the session and why their presence is crucial. So you have to make them feel special. That's one. And the second one, it's not very elegant, but of course you can offer an incentive. So for example, if we're going to have a co-creation session with young people, that it's not like, oh, we need their expertise in the room, but we have to have young people, then you can maybe offer a 30 € voucher for Amazon or something, That's something that has worked for us before, but again, it goes back to the budget. I would say that the more personalized the communication with your stakeholder is, or the invitation, the more likely is that they will attend. But of course, it takes time. It takes time, a lot of time. So yeah, if someone else has any other tip for this, please do let us know. We're always looking for ways to increase the attendance rates for all our sessions. Do you have any suggestions for getting participants to follow through and actually do the pre-work? That's very difficult as well. If you're relying on people to actually spend their time doing this without without having some sense of accountability, it's going to be really hard. We usually tend to limit the pre-work as much as we can. And we only focus on, maybe if we're going to have interviews with some of them, that would count as the pre-work. But try to limit that to the extent, to the possible extent. I would say that if you have really engaged stakeholders, do it, because you will be surprised by people. But it has happened to us that we have asked for pre-work and then just 2 people have done it and the others didn't, and it makes a mess in the dynamics of the session. Do you really need consent then for recording or formal ethics? Yes, always. A media consent form. And you need to be very explicit about what their contributions will look like after they are like published, if they're going to be published. If they're going to be talking about a sensitive topic, make sure that you put a clause or something that talks about anonymization of the responses. And you have to be really careful about that. We always will need a media consent, a participant consent. And you can use what it's called the participant sheet, the participant information sheet, I think it is called, where you lay out all the things that we're going to be talking about during the session and what they are consenting to by attending the session. Yeah, the paper linkages to co-creation, I will share that. I know that we're over the hour, but if you're interested, I'm going to stay here for a few minutes just to answer the questions that we have in the chat. But feel free to leave if you have to. It is being recorded. And thank you, everyone, for staying here until the end. Okay, just follow up on Lucrina's question. Yeah, I will share the paper linkages related to co-creation. Then Santiago said, what can you advise on the workshop structure when you have different stakeholders like experts and decision makers with perhaps different perspectives on a problem? That's where the breakout groups will come in very handy. So you will have like a plenary session or section at the beginning where you will be presenting or talking about framing the co-creation session. And that's where I would recommend structuring the activities in breakout groups. It would depend. Maybe you would like the industry stakeholders working together just alone by themselves at first, or just the policy people. And then maybe in a second part of the workshop, what you can do is that you can mix them, like having one industry policy researcher in the breakout groups. But the breakout groups will be your solution for this, okay? Of course, if you have any more questions, you can reach out to me without any problem. So yeah, I'm happy to help. Based on my experience, of course, I don't have all the right answers, but thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I hope that it was helpful. We will follow up with the email with slides and the resources and all the additional links that we have been mentioning. Okay? So I hope that you have a great rest of your day.